Hello, and welcome back to the 38th episode of Reconciling Zero, as we go in search of Effective Zen. The question we posed last episode was, can we now start to reconcile zero? Recall that as part of our quest to answer the question, is this Zen mountain, we have been recently examining the notion of zero-buddhism. Again, the requisite conditions needed for the activity of Buddhism to arise. Previously, we identified three such conditions. First, we need an enlightened teacher. Second, we need a clear picture of a path moving forward. Last, we need an understanding of the obstacles expected along this path. And we've summarized an effective teacher as one who recognizes that at some level, all of us seek perfect certainty, which ultimately manifests as the realization of infinite mind, and which is invariably obstructed by a misreading of the self. And over the last 2 weeks, we have been investigating a proper reading of the self, utilizing three resources. The first resource, an understanding of the five aggregates. The second resource, an understanding of the Zen master Joshu Sasaki's teaching of zero. And the last resource, the Anattalakhana Sutta, the Buddha's discourse called Characteristics of Not Self. And with all this, we came to some simple realizations regarding the Buddha's teaching of the self. First, the Buddha does not teach that there is no such thing as the self. Second, the Buddha does teach that besides the self, there is something called the not-self. Third, the self invariably arises and disappears, which is not a good thing or a bad thing. It just is. Last, an integral part of any Buddhist path should include an awareness of self-talk centered around the five aggregates, something Sasaki would call the I am activity. For this episode, I'd like to pause and appreciate how the teaching of zero helped get us to this place. That is, I'd like to reconcile zero. Recall how Sasaki used his teaching of zero to address the activity of the self. Paraphrasing, the zero self, that activity that does not need to proclaim itself, inevitably splits into naturally opposing activities, plus and minus, or expand and contract, which results in the self that does need to proclaim I am. These naturally opposing activities eventually, inevitably, cancel each other and disappear, resulting in the return to the zero self. And to really appreciate Sasaki's teaching of zero, let's return to the Anattalakhana Sutta. We must ask, could we have made sense of this sutta without an understanding of zero? For instance, recall how we divided the sutta into 6 sections, and that in the second section of the sutta, the Buddha stated that the five aggregates were the not-self, based on the logic that they couldn't possibly be the self. But without understanding that the teaching of zero tells us that the self comprises only 2 fundamental activities, the not-self and the self. One could or would be justified in asking, okay, so the five aggregates are not the self, why can't they just be something else? Zero tells us that there is nothing else. In the third section of the sutta, the Buddha comments that the five aggregates are not fit to be regarded as the self. That is, statements like, this is mine, this I am, this is myself, have no merit. And in the fourth section, the Buddha comments that the five aggregates should be disregarded as self by using statements like, this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. But without an understanding of zero and the principles of naturally opposing activities, plus and minus or expand and contract, one would naturally wonder, well, aren't these two sections making the exact same case? Wouldn't just one of these cases suffice? What am I missing here? But with the teaching of zero, we know exactly what is going on. Namely, the third section addresses the plus activity, the I am activity, while the fourth section addresses the minus activity, the I am not activity. With these two sections, the Buddha instructs us on tempering the plus activity while reinforcing the minus activity. The result is a return to the zero self. In the last section of the sutta, the narrator describes how the group of 5 monks had all experienced the activity of not-self by not grasping. The importance of this section can be easily overlooked. Here it would be a mistake to presume that the monks had somehow attained a special state. But Sasaki's teaching of zero reminds us that the not-self, this non-grasping self, inevitably manifests when the naturally opposing activities that make up the I am self both disappear. We must thoroughly appreciate that the monks, in experiencing not self, had attained absolutely nothing. So now we have a better appreciation of zero. Hopefully we have a better understanding of the teaching of the self. And finally we have a better understanding of zero-buddhism, the conditions necessary for the activity of Buddhism to arise. So where do we go from here? For the next episode, we pose the question, what is the activity of Buddhism? And until next week, cheers!